I am 25 years old and I was born in South Africa. The Bible has been rewritten and rewritten, and there's loads of different versions of it, and it's difficult to kind of assess what to follow. If you go to church, there are different preachers that preach different things, different topics. So it's very difficult to kind of have a grasp on what is correct, what is true. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why Islam kind of felt like a divine intervention.
Welcome to Journey to Islam Stories.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kemal. My previous name was Callan. I am 25 years old and I was born in South Africa. I converted to Islam about 2 months ago. After about a year old, I moved to Dubai and I lived there for about 12 years. And then after that, I spent a lot of time in different boarding schools around South Africa. I grew up, a large portion of my life was in Dubai, and I actually changed schools a lot of times throughout my life. But currently I'm busy doing a degree in psychology and industrial and organizational psychology at the University of Cape Town. Quality of life in South Africa is not great. There is a high level of crime, but the social life, I mean, there's a lot of good people there. So basically, what actually happened, it kind of happened by chance in a way, because previously I was working in Iraq, and it was during COVID. And what happened is all the countries got closed. Flights were all banned, and there was only one flight available, and it was to Turkey. So I ended up coming to Turkey, and I lived in Bacalevla for about a year, and I spent about 4 months in Didim, and I just kind of fell in love with the country. And I didn't even at that time, I heard mosques, I saw Muslim people, but I wasn't really involved in that kind of life. I didn't know that much. But I came back just because I loved Turkey. Yeah. So I came back, and when I actually came back, this was the first time that I kind of spoke to Islamic people. I became Muslim 2 months ago, so I was 25 years old. And before becoming Muslim, I I was a Christian, but I wouldn't say I was a very devout Christian. It was more that my family was Christian and I was kind of raised in a Christian family, but we weren't, very religious. I think the biggest thing was, being a Christian, I had a lot of questions that were unanswered, a lot of doubts that I couldn't find the solution or answer to. So I was just kind of missing that connection to God. I think that, being Christian, I did always believe in a higher power or in God, but there was just always, as you know, that the Bible has been rewritten and rewritten, and there's loads of different versions of it, and it's difficult to kind of assess what to follow. If you go to church, there are different preachers that preach different things, different topics. So it's very difficult to kind of have a grasp on what is correct, what is true. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why Islam kind of felt like a divine intervention. It almost felt like it just grasped out and grabbed me, not the other way around. I think just taking it day by day, it's difficult because a lot of the time, when a big adversary comes to your way, you kind of lose sight of God. And when things are challenging, you kind of ask for help, but when things are good, you kind of, it's not an issue in your life to kind of reach out and speak to Him. Really, just day by day. I know I didn't really have a clear image of the future. I didn't really look to God for support. It was kind of just take every day as it comes and just hope for the best. I think the biggest difference is that, becoming Islamic is it feels like it's a new chapter in my life. I feel like it's opened like a new door. I'm meeting new people. I'm learning more about morals and ethics, how to be a better person. It's also teaching me more discipline, doing your namaz, waking up early in the morning, going to bed early. It feels like like you're having a more purposeful life. Well, growing up in Dubai, I heard about it, I saw a lot of Muslim guys around, but I never really got the opportunity to be properly introduced into the religion culture. I've always known about Islam, but rarely known. I would say probably about 6 months ago when I first came to Izmit. But yeah, I've known about Islam for all my life, almost. But in detail or what it's really about. There's always this misconception about what you think Islam really is, especially if you come from like a Western country, right? They have a very bad, interpretation of what Islam is, and it corrupts and it seeps through everyone, and they kind of just believe what they're told instead of actually seeking truth and, the reality of what Islam is. It wasn't great. I didn't think that, I wasn't under the impression that all Islams were terrorists. I didn't think that, but it wasn't a great impression. And, if I think back to it, it's not even something that I can understand why. It's just like seeped in Western culture. You know what I mean? After becoming Muslim and speaking to more Muslim brothers, you kind of understand that it's not the religion, it's the person, right? Every religion, every country, every continent has bad apples, but you can't judge and reflect the whole religion on, a few people. After I did become Muslim, it really helped. I have a friend called Murat, and he helped me a lot, kind of teaching more in-depth stuff. I would say 4 or 5 months ago, and it's weird. It's almost like it just happened. It wasn't like a moment. I woke up and it was just like it seemed like the right thing to do. And I would say it about 2 weeks prior to me converting. So as I previously mentioned, waking up early, performing, trying my best to, not perfect, but trying to complete all 5 namaz. What has changed my daily life? I would say just like trying to be more morally and ethically correct, not lying, not doing bad to others. You know what I mean? So to be honest, I'm quite newly converted. I'm not 100% sure on the Quran and everything, but I would say Al-Fatiha just because it was the first surah that I read. It obviously is number one, the first surah, but just that excitement and kind of that eagerness to try and it was just the start of the Quran. So I would say I haven't finished the Quran, but for now I will say Al-Fatiha. I would say my favorite path, especially compared to being Christian, is that there's kind of, it's not just you say you are this religion and then you do nothing about it. You kind of have to actually, if you want to be a Muslim, you have to do what a Muslim does. You have to pray 5 times. There are like pillars and principles that you have to follow to actually be a Muslim, right? Whereas in Christianity, you're a Christian and then you don't have to do anything. You don't have to go to church. There's no requirements or mandatory obligations that you have to fulfill to actually maintain your religion, right? So I would say for Islam, it's nice to actually, you're believing and you're actually, with what you're doing, you're actually performing and living your life towards that religion, if that makes sense. I would say one of the biggest things, and I don't really have an answer for it. I don't understand why it happens, but after a few times after especially morning prayer, sabah. If I've got a headache or I feel a little bit groggy or moody before, I feel so much more upbeat after doing namaz. It's quite incredible, and I feel a lot of inner peace, tranquility, and especially sabah. I don't know why, but it kind of sets my whole day like on it. It started with a good foot. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Especially being in Turkey, I would say, it's Arabic, Turkish, the Quran. It's just a lot of information to learn. There's like mandatory obligations. There's not mandatory obligations. So it's a lot to learn, and it's difficult to understand where to start. That's what I would say. I would say yes and no. It's a little bit difficult because as I said, I don't speak Turkish. So already that's kind of like I'm really ostracized from communities because I can't speak the actual language. But in terms of being Islamic and going to mosques and stuff like that, I've never felt uncomfortable or not welcome, I think it's very open and free space for any Muslims that would like to go. I would suggest for them to read, to do their own research, to get empirical evidence and not just believe what, politicians or comedians or the social media is telling you, read and do your own research. And maybe it is right for you, but you're not going to know that unless you do your own research. Don't just believe, what people are telling you. I think definitely one thing would be a mentor, someone to talk to and kind of take you through things. But especially, it's really difficult to know what to do, where to start. You know what I mean? Like, just to read the Quran, or do you have to memorize it? You're jumping back and forth. So I think just the kind of like basic guidelines of how to actually go through the Quran. Should you first read the Quran? Should you then learn which sunnahs? Like that kind of stuff. Discussion groups, and I think like, just to be in contact with someone that can kind of answer any questions that you may have. Yeah, and I think just to kind of make it not so it's a chore, you know what I mean? Just go through it at your own pace and enjoy it, I think that a converted Muslim would be in a way better because you can kind of, he's gone through the same kind of experience. So you can kind of sympathize with him and understand his experience and what he's kind of walked through in life. But I think, it's not the end of the world. I think either way, it would be good. It would be fine. The first thing I asked was that, for guidance, support, and to kind of direct me in the right path on becoming a Muslim. Support and guidance for when I go back to South Africa to continue being a Muslim. As it's not a majority Muslim country. I think that it's only 3% Islamic. So it's going to be quite a challenge to kind of go back and continue being Muslim. I also ask, general stuff about my family, that kind of stuff, family and friends, health and support.